first became interested in addressing poverty while I was doing a project for a just-in-time supplier to Mercedes-Benz. This company had an army of workers who were sequencing parts into the Mercedes-Benz plant. It's an important job because remember, it's part of a much larger system. So any part out of sequence could break the system. You can actually shut down the Mercedes-Benz production line. I met some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life on that plant floor. Magical, hardworking, dedicated, inspiring employees who made their company successful. And most of them were one flat tire away from bankruptcy. You see, at that time, this very important job paid only $7 an hour, $8 if you had seniority. Most of the people on that plant floor were not making a living wage. They belonged to a group that's come to be called the working poor. Here's a surprising statistic about poverty in America. 60% of families in poverty actually have a family member who's working. And the majority of them are actually working full-time. So I ask you, why on earth can't somebody with a full-time job make enough money to lift themselves and their families out of poverty? Is the system broken? Is there an underlying systems problem? And more importantly, can we find a systems solution? Capitalism has been called the greatest economic system on the planet, and no doubt it's fueled the engine of progress in the industrialized world for more than a century. But the only prerequisite for participation in capitalism is what? Having capital, which oddly excludes most would-be participants. Or does it? Two core requirements for starting and running a business are capital and labor. In other words, money and work. Usually ownership is given in exchange for money. But why? Why is that? If you don't have money, will you never enjoy the benefits of ownership? Why not give ownership in exchange for work? It's just as important, it's just as critical to a business, isn't it? I mean, you can't run a business without work. Well, the good news is there is a form of business that provides ownership in exchange for work. It's called a worker-owned cooperative. It's a business entity that's owned and controlled by its workers. Decisions are made democratically, usually one person, one vote. Now, I'm proposing worker-owned cooperatives as a pathway to business ownership and a pathway out of poverty. Worker-owned cooperatives, they build individual wealth and they stabilize communities by anchoring ownership. You see, a co-op business isn't going to close up and relocate someplace else to find lower wages. They're not going to move production overseas to increase shareholder value. Where the focus of a traditional company is on shareholder value, the whole focus of a worker-owned cooperative is on job security, people over profits. As a startup, a worker-owned cooperative is 3 times more likely to be successful than their non-cooperative counterparts. And they're more productive, too. One London School of Business study compared co-ops to non-co-ops in the same industry and found productivity increases between 9 and 19% across the board. Co-ops have transformed the economies of large parts of northern Spain, northern Italy, France, Quebec, Canada. But they're not new to America. It's not a new business form in America. 80% of our milk comes from dairy cooperatives. 30% of farm equipment comes from farm cooperatives. Do you know that 75% of the US land mass is powered by rural electrical cooperatives? Surprising. There are 30,000 co-op businesses in the US with over $3 trillion in assets and $652 billion in revenues. But most of those are consumer or producer cooperatives, where the workers are not owners. A worker-owned cooperative, on the other hand, is still relatively rare in America. So why do you think that is? Why are they so rare? I mean, with a clear path to ownership, the ability to reverse the cycle of poverty, the documented community and business benefits, why don't we see more worker-owned cooperatives? It's what I would call a no-brainer. My daughter is older now. When she was 15, she would have said, duh. I'll give you a few reasons. First reason is they're complicated. It's a lot more complex starting a worker-owned cooperative than it is to start a sole proprietorship or even an LLC. Besides the usual business formalities, you've got to create, document, and then manage a system for sharing ownership and decision-making. And the laws that govern co-op, they're different from state to state. Some states prescribe exactly what kind of co-op or corporation you need, depending upon the type of co-op. Other states, you're not allowed to incorporate if you're a cooperative. So it takes a lot of research at the state level. The second reason is that there isn't an ecosystem, or very little ecosystem, to support cooperatives. There are very few service providers like attorneys or accountants that understand anything about cooperatives, especially worker-owned cooperatives. So unless you happen to find that rare attorney that knows something about cooperative, you end up doing most of the work yourself, or training your attorney to do the work. The next reason, I hear this often from people, and I like to call it the skills argument. The skills argument goes something like this. If a lack of education was part of that cycle of poverty that you talk about, then people in poverty don't have the skills required to be productive in the work environment. Isn't that right? You think that's right? The answer is no, it's not right. Profoundly wrong. It's because of another kind of system, a production system. Production systems have revolutionized manufacturing and a lot of other industries through continuous improvement. But besides these terrific productivity gains, production systems have a very important feature to improving employee skills, and that's standardized work. Documented work standards is the basis of any good production system. It enables any employee at any skill level to become quickly productive at a given task by following the standard. Then once they've mastered that task, they can start to contribute to continuous improvement. So production systems with standardized work negates that argument, that skills argument against cooperative formation. But by far, the biggest reason we don't see more cooperatives is simply knowledge, or really the lack thereof. I see worker-owned cooperatives as a systems solution to the problem of poverty, making our system of capitalism more inclusive. But the best solution in the world is of no value if you don't know about it, which is why I'm here today. I'm telling you about it, so now you know. John F. Kennedy, in his inaugural address in 1961, said that if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. Worker-owned cooperatives may well expand our system of capitalism to include and help the many who are poor. And I, for one, think that's an idea worth sharing. Thank you.